Regulations Mid-Year Update 2021 webinar. My name is Amy Paley. I'm a Marketing Manager for Intertek's Hardlines and Softlines business lines. Before we begin, I would like to go over some brief housekeeping items to ensure you get the most out of the webinar. Please keep in mind that due to the high number of attendees, all callers aside from the presenters have their lines automatically muted. If you have questions during the webinar, please type them into the question pane on your control panel, and we will address them if we have time at the end of the presentation. If we aren't able to address your question during the webinar, we will be sure to have one of our experts respond to you shortly. Today's webinar is being recorded, and a PDF of the slides presented, as well as a link to the webinar recording, will be emailed to each attendee after the webinar. During the webinar, our experts will provide an overview of US, Canada, and EU regulatory updates related to consumer products, as well as enforcement analysis in the US and Canada. And now I'd like to introduce our speakers. Dr. Pratika Chiporia is a frequent speaker and author on quality, safety, and environmental issues affecting the textiles, toys, and hardlines industries. In his capacity as the Director of Global Key Account Management and Technical Services, Pratik assists Intertek clients in building and implementing robust and efficient compliance programs. He also provides ongoing counsel to Intertek clients about horizon scanning for legislative and regulatory updates related to consumer product safety and chemical management. Pratik actively participates in development of AATCC, ASTM, and ISO standards. He holds a PhD in Fiber and Polymer Science from North Carolina State University and a Master of Science degree in Fiber and Polymer Science from Clemson University. Our second speaker today is Dr. Stella Shinu Lee, a technical manager at Intertek. In this role, Stella provides technical and regulatory support to global brands and retailers by developing and evaluating product compliance programs, improving protocols for product testing, and participating in the standards development process for the US, Canada, and China markets. She is also a frequent speaker at the American Association of Textile Chemists and Colorists Conference and the World Textile Information Network Conference. Stella holds a PhD in Fiber and Polymer Science and a Master of Science degree in Textile Engineering from North Carolina State University and a bachelor's degree from Donghua University in Shanghai, China. And just a quick reminder for anybody who joined during my introduction, the webinar is being recorded, so you will receive an email with a link to the slides and recording after the webinar. And also, if you have questions during the webinar, please type them into your control panel. And now I'd like to pass it over to Pratik to start.
Great. Thanks, Amy, and good afternoon and good morning, everyone. So let's look at the agenda. So as Amy mentioned, we'll look at the three main regions for the regulatory updates, as well as close it by the evaluation of the enforcement that has been performed in Canada and US, just to understand the trends of enforcement in these two regions. So looking first at US. So first a quick political update. After almost 6 months, President Biden, just within a frame of 2 weeks, nominated 3 people. On July 2nd, President Biden nominated Alexander Hohn-Sarek for being the commissioner as well as the chair of the CPSC, along with Mary Boyle for being the commissioner of the CPSC, and then subsequently, last week, President nominated Rich Trumka Jr. for the additional seat of the CPSC. So, if you look at the commission currently, there is 1 vacant seat that's of the Commissioner Burkle. So Mary Boyle is supposed to be filling up that seat. Commissioner, if it confirmed, Alexander Hohn-Sarek, he would be nominated for the seat that would be vacated by Commissioner Kaye in another month or so, a couple months or so. And then the last nomination, which would be for the Rich Trumka Jr., that would be for the for the acting chair Adler's position. So his term expires later in the year, and then he would have had a holdover year if he chose to stay back. So this would be, in case if that confirmation goes through, then it would be for that acting chair Adler's seat. So, again, in case if all these are nominations, so they do require, Senate hearing as well as Senate confirmation. So in case if all all of these three nominations do go through, then the commission makeup would, the commission would be at full strength. So they would have all 5 commissioners in place, and then you'd have 2 Republican commissioners, so Dana Biocco and Peter Feldman, who are both confirmed, and then the 3 Democratic nominees would be pending confirmation. So Mary Ball, Alexander Hohn-Starrett, as well as Rich Trumka Jr. Right? So it depends, and so the term would be based on the confirmation that goes through. So Commissioner Biocco's term expires in 24. Mary Ball, if she gets confirmed, the term would expire in 2025. Peter Feldman, Commissioner Feldman's term is up until 2026, and then the other 2 nominees, their term would be 2027 and 2028 for Richard Trumka Jr. respectively, right? So again, this is a quick update because if the makeup of the commission changes, it could change the agenda and the priorities at the commission as well, and so that always is important for us to understand as we look at the CPSC. So now getting into the the actual updates. So last year Congress passed the Omnibus Bill 133, which at the end of almost 2,500 pages had a section about 10-12 pages which adopted the California Technical Bulletin 117 2013 version as a national flammability standard for upholstered furniture, and it asked the CPSC to promulgate regulation to implement that requirement. So CPSC published the rule implementing this requirement, and the effective date, which was required by Congress for the safety, which is the flammability requirement, stays June 25th of 2021. So any upholstered furniture, and there is a very, very specific definition in the law of what is an upholstered furniture, must meet, and whether that's domestically manufactured or imported on after June 25th, must meet the California Technical Bulletin 117 2013 flammability requirement. Right, and then also the 2013 year is also important because it's in the law that it is 2013 law, right? However, for labeling, considering that with all the impact that COVID had, as well as due to all the challenges with the shipments, across the sea, the CPSC has kind of deferred or phased in the labeling requirement and plotted an additional year to phase them in. And so specifically just the labeling part of the requirement will become effective June 25th of next year, right? The Congress specifically stated that the indoor upholstered furniture, which would be under the scope of this regulation, doesn't require certification. So you don't need to create a GCC for this regulation. However, there is a specific labeling requirement that is kind of serves as a proxy to show that that is your kind of self-declaration of compliance, if you will, right? So the label examples are shown here, and that's kind of the exact language that's in the law, which states complies with the US CPSC requirements for upholstered furniture flammability. So here are 2 examples that are being provided by the CPSC in case one, if it's a standalone label, or second, where in case if it's combined with the TB 117 and like a law label, TB 117 or SB 1019 labels, right? So if you could combine with any of those, the requirement is that this information or the label be conspicuous and legible. So the staff has recommended, again, this is a recommendation that the font size be at least 1/8 of an inch, right? And or at least not be smaller than anything else that's on the label, in case if it is along with something else. Also have a border around it and have it in black printed on white label. This again goes more towards the conspicuousness as well as the legibility of the information. And so this is kind of the recommendation that the CPSC staff has in order to meet that requirement. Also, they've stated that this information should be on the front of the label rather than the back of the label. In case if you are adding other things, you could have other things on the back of this label but not this information on back of some other label. Right? So, and again, they've also published some good FAQs to walk you through some of the commonly asked questions that they fielded, and so it's definitely a good resource in case if you haven't reviewed it, definitely worthwhile to review those. On a similar note, kind of staying with the flammability, the CPSC also, updated the mattress flammability standard to update the standard reference material, which is a cigarette that's used for evaluating the burn behavior. So back in 2010, NIST had developed the standard reference material, which was the SRM 1196. Unfortunately, the stock that they had, they ran out of it, a couple of years back, and so they had to update that. And that manufacturer stopped making those cigarettes, and so they had to subcontract and go through the whole process. But after all of that work, they were able to come up with SRM 1196A, which is a comparable cigarette. And so the CPSC also evaluated that, and they found that the 1196A, it's a safety neutral replacement of 1196. And so they updated that reference and also specifically addressed that because it's a safety neutral replacement, that the manufacturers or the importers do not really have to perform the testing again of all the prototypes, and so thereby alleviating the cost of testing along with that. And also, this is the same cigarette that's used also for the TB117. So again, as we have the furniture flammability national standard now, this will be a critical update that will also be helpful in evaluating for the furniture flammability as well. So in case if you have domestic labs that you're testing, your own lab which you're testing flammability, you can procure that from the NIST at the attached link. So staying with CPSC, but switching over to the CPSI and the durable nursery products. So CPSC for almost few years now, they've been working on the rule for infant sleep products. Initially, it was inclined infant sleep products right back when they started in 2017, but then in last year they revised that and changed the scope to just make it infant sleep products and remove that specific caveat of inclined infant sleep products, right? And so they have proposed the supplemental rulemaking, which they adopted in the year earlier last month. The specific requirements, if you will, for this rule are that the scope is, as I mentioned, clarified to state that the scope includes infant sleep products, and so that's both inclined as well as flat sleep surfaces. The restriction for the seat angle is to 10 degrees or less from the horizontal, and this 10-degree requirement, just to give you a little bit of backstory, so it comes from, that was based on the Manon study, where they concluded that the muscle activity for the infants, in case if they roll over in an inclined sleep products, where if it's a 20-degree incline, was significantly different than the products which had the 0-degree incline, right? So that increased demand on the abdominal muscles could lead to increased fatigue and suffocation if an infant is unable to reposition himself after rolling. And so that's why the Manon study had concluded that the inclined sleep products with a 10-degree or less sleep surface incline do not significantly impact the infant motion or muscle activity. And so the CPSC kind of, took that recommendation and used that as a requirement. So that's kind of where the 10-degree comes from, right? Also, now the requirement is that for the infant sleep products, they comply with the 16 CFR 1218 mandatory standards for the bassinets and cradles. The key requirement is going to be, again, for the seat back angle measurement. You don't necessarily have to meet the general requirements of performance for the F3118 standard, right? The effective date for this is the June 23rd of next year, and the link to the final rule is also in here as well. Staying with nursery products for the next few slides. So this one is update on the folding chairs and stools. So for many of these standards now, what the CPSC staff is doing is they're publishing direct final rules to update the reference to the standards, especially when these standards are safety neutral or improving the safety. And you know, what the CPSC staff doing is they'll publish a direct final rule with an effective date, and then also there'll be another date where if there is an adverse comment, then that effective date gets, you know, prolonged and or reviewed. So same thing for folding chairs and stools. So, you know, the CPSC, there were two standards. So in 2020, they adopted the 2019 version of the safety standard, where the main change was about the locking and the latching mechanism. In the 2021 standard, the significant change was more about the scope, where the ottomans were included in the scope, and also for the infant and toddler rockers, they are now directed to the F3084 2020 standard to make sure that they are appropriately tested. And also there was like a older test method for locking, which was there in the test method, but it wasn't really used anywhere in the requirements section. And so they also removed that one as well. So this one will become effective August 21st of this year. Staying with infant swings, so again, similar direct final rule that goes into effect, that went into effect on April 3rd of this year, because CPSC didn't receive any adverse comments on this. The way the infant swings are defined is it's for swing that enables an infant in a seated position up until they kind of start walking or climbing out of it, which is about 9 months or so. The previous one that was referenced was the 2013 version of the standard, and the CPSC reviewed the 2020, and they said, you know, the revisions were neutral or improved the safety, and so they adopted this in the direct final rule. So again, significant changes here are in terms of the procedure that's used for measuring the seat back angle, as well as the bottom angles, along with the clarity on where you need to place the hinged weight. Also addressing the tethered strap that could potentially cause entanglement, and then also revise the scope to include the powered mechanism that have gliding action as well, right? So, and then finally, high chairs. So another treatable nursery product. So again, this one, the rule became effective just 2 weeks back on July 3rd. Again, this was a direct final rule, and CPSC didn't receive any adverse comments. So it went into effect. Here, some of the key revisions in the revised standards were the new stability requirements to address the forward, rearward, and all the stabilities. The static load testing was split into two to address the upright high chairs as well as the high chairs that are intended for children that are unable to sit upright and assisted. Same thing for the dynamic high chair testing as well. And then the tray static load test was intended to assess the possible collapse. Is split again between the two to adjust for the lower height as well. So again, this one became effective on July 3rd. Switching agencies, so going over to the EPA, generally we don't tend to cover EPA regulations because they impact the chemical manufacturers and importers. However, in this instance, this rule is pretty broad, and it's under the Toxic Substance Control Act, TSCA, Section 8, where EPA is requesting or trying to request a gathering information for PFAS substances. So again, this is a proposed rule, but the reason we wanted to highlight this is because of the broad nature of the regulation, both in terms of the scope. So it includes PFAS substances, right? So there are, on the EPA, they identified about close to 1,400, like 1,350 or so substances on the inventory list, and of those, about 670 or so, 69 of them are on the active inventory list. That means, they were being used, or someone identified them being used past 2006, right? So potentially you would have to report for up to 670 PFAS substances, or at least try and do due diligence for those substances. Generally, this type of reporting obligations or requests come for chemical manufacturers or importers. However, in this case, that has been extended also to the manufacturers and importers of articles An article is a fancy term of saying it's a product or a finished component. So in case if you are importing, clothing or outdoor, tents or sleeping bags or any of those type of products, which potentially where you might have used these substances, now you would be obligated to this requirement, right? And then another aspect of the scope is also the broadness, because the look back period, if you will, the reporting would go back all the way to 2011. So you would have to start looking at all the information that you would have had from January 1st, 2011, all the way up until now. So the reporting would commence 6 months after the final rule is published, and then it would continue for 6 months from that period. And then there's also extensive record keeping requirements. So you'd have to keep all the information or the due diligence that you performed to gather the information for about 5 years, in case if you didn't provide the information, right? So that's kind of the main reason we wanted to highlight, even though this is a proposed rule, that in case a lot of the industry would be impacted by this. So definitely do review the impact and then convey any concerns if you have to the EPA and or through various groups that you're working through. So the public comment deadline is August 27th, so still about a month or so out. And then switching over again, FTC. So this was just today, so it's kind of fresh off the press, if you will. So if you remember last year, July, suddenly out of the blue, FTC proposed repealing the care labeling rule, and so there was a lot of confusion because just a couple of years back they had a workshop to review like wet cleaning and how to revise and update the standards. So it was definitely a little confounding, at least for me. And so there was a vote today on whether to kind of continue down that path of repealing the care labeling rule. So the commission just voted on that. So they unanimously voted to issue a statement that the FTC does not intend to repeal the care labeling rule, and they essentially, along with the staff, they will work on improving the care labeling rule so that it's most up to date. So things like wet cleaning, the care symbols, which I'm still referencing the 96 standard, all of those are more up to date and in line with what's being used in the industry. So again, this is significantly impactful for apparel and as well as some of the other industry which use apparel care instructions, is that the FTC will keep the rule in place and also will work to revise the rule as compared to repealing it. So with that, I'll pass over to Stella to walk us through some of the next updates.
Thank you, Pratik. So this is also for FTC. So on July 14th, 2021, the U.S. Federal Trade Commission published the final rule for the Made in USA labeling, 16 CFR 323. So the FTC adopted a rule proposed last year with limited modifications. The FTC is tasked with protecting consumers from deceptive acts and the practice under FTC Act. So Made in USA claim should be like other claim, be truthful, no deceptive, and substantiated. So the Made in USA claim fall into two broad categories. Those are made the all or virtually all standard, and those that are qualifying claims. And the enforcement action by FTC for Made in USA claims published by the FTC in 1997. However, last year, FTC proposed a rule for the Made in USA claim. The rule was intended to strengthen enforcement while making it easier for business to understand the requirement of Made in USA labeling. So under this rule, companies are barred from making unqualified Made in USA claims unless they can establish that the products that is finally, the final assembly or processing of the product occur in the United States, and a significant process that goes into the product occur in the United States, and all or virtually all ingredient or component of the product are made and sourced in the United States. So the final rule is effective on August 13th, 2021. It's still like a less than 1 year. And the rule authorized the FTC to seek civil penalty consistent, which are currently set at $43,280 per violation. slide, yeah. So on January 8th, 2021, the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment proposed an amendment to short form warning. So in this amendment, it limited the use of short form warning, because currently in the market, there's a lot of products is not supposed to use short form warning. So it limited to the short warning to only the product with a total surface of area available for consumer information is 5 square inches or less, or the packaging or shape or size cannot accommodate a full warning, and also require including at least one chemical per toxicity and point out in warning, and prohibit the use of short form warning on the internet and the catalogs. And also there's an amendment that clarifies that the use of short form warning is permitted for the food. So the details are in our last month's webinar. You can check the recording. The OE, yeah. So next is for the Oregon. Oregon Health Authority has published the final rule implementing phase 3 requirement of Oregon's 2015 Toxic-Free Kids Act. So this phase 3 final rule established detailed requirements to remove HPCCH or substitute HPCCH with an alternative to make the product less hazardous, or have a waiver approved by OHA for the HPCCH by January 1st, 2022. So this is mainly for the manufacture of multiple products, children's cosmetics, and the products made for or marketed to the children under 3 years of age. So you can see the details in below link. So if seeking a waiver, the manufacturer must apply to the OHA for a waiver by their third biannual reporting deadline, which is January 1st, 2022. For waiver, the company must either perform an ex-post assessment and demonstrate that the chemical of concern does not migrate from children's body under condition of normal use of the product, or conduct an alternative assessment to validate that eliminating or substituting the HPCCH is not financially or technically feasible. So another way, if the manufacturer substitute an HPCCH with an alternative chemical, it must submit a hazard assessment to the OHA, demonstrating that the new chemical is less hazardous than the substituted HPCCH. So the manufacturer with annual global gross sale below 5 million are exempt from all the requirement of this rule. Moving forward to Vermont. So Vermont's Governor Phil signed a Bill S-20 into law on May 18th, 2021. This law impacts chemicals in a wide range of products and amend a list of the chemicals of high concern to children. So the Bill S-20 restricts the sale of PFAS in firefighting agent and equipment, rugs, carpets, aftermarket stand, and water-resistant treatment, ski wax, and food packaging. So they have a different effective date. So most the Class 1 firefighting foam is on July 1st, 2022. But for the Class B firefighting foam used at a terminal, the effective date is January 1st, 2024. For the other items like residential rugs and carpets, aftermarket stand, and the water-resistant treatment for rugs and carpets, and the ski wax, food packaging, those effective date is all on July 1st, 2023. So besides of the restriction of PFAS, this law also have this reporting rule amend to add PFAS chemical as a chemical of high concern to children, with reporting requirement only for those following 3 substances. This would take effect on July 1st, 2022. Also for this law, it's also have the food packaging requirements starting from July 1st, 2023. PFAS and also pellet and are prohibited to be intentionally added and presented in any amount in food packaging. So this affects a lot of food packaging manufacturers, and the Department of Health may adopt a rule prohibiting intentionally added biphenyls in food packaging and its contingent on availability of safer alternative in sufficient quantity and at a comparable cost. So the prohibition shall not take effect until 2 years after the Department of Health adopted rule. And for the COC, the Attorney General may request a COC for the manufacturer. The COC should be furnished with 13 days upon request by Attorney General. Move forward for the DTSC. So on July 1st, 2021, the Department of Toxic Substance Control adopted carbide and rocks containing PFAS as a priority product. So the domestic and foreign carbide and rocks manufacturer whose products contain any member of class of PFAS in their carbide or rocks must submit the following document. So first is a PPN as a priority product notification by August 30th, 2021. It's like a month from now, and the PPN must name all the products that contain PFAS that are sold in California. And the manufacturer will also have options to submit one of the following by the December 28th, 2021. A chemical removal, a product removal, or a product and chemical replacement intent confirmation notification, or a preliminary alternative analysis report, or one of the alternative analysis reporting options. So for this law, the carbide and rocks refer to any consumer products made from natural or synthetic fabric intended to be used as a floor covering instead of a commercial or residential building, inside of a commercial or residential building. And this include a carbide doormats and the carpets and rocks solely for outdoor use. However, the products for the use in vehicle resistant resilient floor covering, artificial turf, work hanging covering, and table mats and camping sleeping mat are excluded. So manufacturer of carbide and rocks that do not contain PFAS do not need to take any action. But for the manufacturers of carbide and rocks contain PFAS need to take action from a month from now. Next slide, please. So in December 2020, the New York Governor Cuomo signed into law prohibiting sale of food packaging product containing intentionally added PFAS. So the PFAS have a unique property of grease resistance, stain resistance, and oil water repellency, property that make them very attractive and functional for food packaging purpose. The PFAS, including more widely known like PFOA and PFOS, they have been identified as possible human cancer carcinogen based on the intensive impulse analysis, causing them to be known as chemical of concern. So as defined in this bill, the food packaging refer to a package or packaging component that intended for direct food contact, and it's compressed in substantial part of paper, paperboard, or other material originally derived from plant fiber. And PFAS substance refer to a class of fluorinated organic chemical containing at least one fully fluorinated carbon atom, and intentionally added the chemical means the chemical added serve an intended function in the product component. So the company found that violating the law would be subject to $10,000 for the first time fine, and with subsequent violation reaching up to 25,000. Moving forward for the ASTM. So ASTM International has approved a new standard F35202 safety specification for barrier face covering. So this is the first of its kind, and this standard is intended to cover general consumer face covering and exclusive face mask or medical mask for use of healthcare setting, which is regulated by the FDA. Also, it's excluded respirator intended to be used as personal protective equipment in the workplace environment. So this standard covers general construction, like design to cover at least the wearer's face and mouth, and fit snugly to minimize the leakage, free of sharp edge, sharp points, sizing, and so on. And also have the requirement for the flammability. The material shall be classified as class 1 or class 2 when tested for 16 CFR 1610. For the conformity assessment, the Model A requirement is in Guide ASTM F3050, and the PFE and airflow resistance evaluation must be performed by a laboratory that is ISO 17025 accredited, and it has the test within their accredited scope. For labeling, so there's some key information are required on the product or packaging or both, like the manufacturer's names and information, the performance of PFE, and the breathing resistance. Either should be level 1 and level 2 or continuous performance pentagram. And also the material traceability should be on the label as well. So most importantly is for the performance requirement for this face covering. For the PFE, you can see for the level 1, it should be no less than 20%, and for level 2 is no less than 50%. For the airflow, the breathing resistance, level 1 should be less than 15 millimeter, and level 2 should be less than 5 millimeter. So there's different options to show the levels, and you can choose the ones. And moving forward to the packaging, Clearinghouse approved the change. The Toxic in Packaging Clearinghouse approved a significant revision to the model toxic in the packaging legislation, including the restriction of sale of packaging and the packaging material containing a pallet greater than 100 parts per million or 0.01% by weight, and the prohibition on the sale of packaging and the packaging material containing intentionally added PFAS, and establishing criteria for the identification and the classification of the list of chemical of high concern in packaging, and also the removal of exemption of date of manufacture labels and the reusable packaging with the end of life recovery and higher limit for the recycled content will retain the exemptions for the when the non-feasible alternative exists or where state regulation required addition of heavy metal with approved exemptions. So this is the requirement for the TPCH for the lead, cadmium, mercury, and the chromium 6. The sum of the concentration level should not exceed 100 ppm by weight, and the pallet the concentration is similarly it's 100 ppm, and for the PFAS is prohibited. So the revision you can review the below link. That's it for the US. I will hand over to Pratik for Canada's update.
Cool. So thanks, Stella. So going across the border to Canada, there have been few significant revisions. So first and foremost, which is the most recent as well, which is this month, the Canada Health Canada as well as the Environment Canada, they had published the final rule for the formaldehyde emissions from composite wood products. So this was pretty, the emission requirements are pretty much same as the EPA Task Title 6 or CARB Phase 2, if you will, which is kind of like, the precursor to the Task Title 6 requirements. The scope remains similar, particle board, so composite wood products as well as laminated products, so particle wood, MDF, thin MDF, hardwood plywood. And here are the emissions requirement. What changed from the proposal, which was last year, was that the final rule does have specific TPC, third-party certified requirements in there, and they've also published a couple of documents. One is on testing, and the other one is for the role of TPC. So as again, there's a phase in time of 18 months, so the rule will become effective January 7th of 2023. So it gives ample time to digest the information and also, get things in place in order to meet the requirements. Specifically for the laminated product, the requirements has been extended over to January 7th of 2028. Right, so the testing requirements would be and certification would be from that point. However, the underlying composite wood products, if you are using those, would still have to meet that January 7, 2023. So there are similar to the Task Title 6, there is a requirement for a labeling, which, being Canada, you have to make sure it's both English and French. There are also requirements for record keeping and reporting as well. So it's a very detailed rule, but the requirements are very, very similar to Task Title 6, and there is also a recognition of that as well in the rule that the Environment Canada and Health Canada has published as well. So you can see that rule in detail on the link there. So going to Health Canada. So again, with similar to like nursery products, so the Health Canada has proposed to revise the Stolarz regulations. The idea here for this, as well as some of the other regulations that we'll see, is one, the clarity of the scope. Two is a little bit better alignment with US as well as Europe, and so that'll be the theme. And so we'll look at the specific requirements on the next slide, but the comment period on this just closed on June 17th. So looking at requirements, so as I said, alignment with the US, Europe. So for mechanical hazards, the requirement would be to meet either the US, which would be F833, or Europe, which would be ISO 31110 standard. For the chemical requirements, it's more on the clarity. So right now, the stroller, the regulation incorporates by reference some of the requirements from surface coatings and toys regulations. So the proposal would be to list them out in the regulation itself for the clarity, and also clarifying the scope, which we'll see even for the surface coating materials regulation, is that some of the things like stickers and films and other coating materials, which currently isn't clear, are also included in the scope as well. Same thing for toxicological hazards as well, just referencing and bringing it back in the Stolarz regulations rather than referencing toys regulation. Phthalates, this would be an addition, right? So addition of the phthalates requirement to the vinyl components that are in carriages and strollers. So again, Health Canada, unlike CPSC, they only apply the phthalates requirements to vinyl components, so vinyl being PVC. So it's not all plasticized components, so that's a significant difference even for the current phthalates regulation for Canada for toys and childcare article, right? So this is very, very unique. So this would be extension, and they would apply that to vinyl components of carriages and strollers. And then, of course, warnings and information would be similar to 833 and ISO standard. However, you also would need that information in French as well to meet that bilingual labeling requirements. So as I alluded to, so surface coating materials regulations, so Health Canada also proposed to revise this regulation as well. Again, this aim is to, one, clarify the requirements, two, align with this in terms of both requirements and scope with the US, and also revising some of the other regulations which have similar requirements. So your toys regulations, cradles and bassinets regulations, expansion gates and expandable enclosures regulations, as well as playpen regulations, right? So here the revisions would be first and foremost to, because the definition of coating is that it dries, and there might be some coatings which do not quote unquote dry, example being powder coatings. And so specifying that this would be included in the scope. Also, things like forms and stickers would be in the scope as well. So that's clarity on the scope. Alignment with the US would be that you would expand the scope to the household furniture products. So this would be a general household furniture products, which are covered in the scope of 1303 for the US. And so that would be alignment with the US in requirements and expansion of scope again. Clarifying that inaccessible components, both for surface coating for lead as well as for heavy metals, do not require testing because the risk exposure would be minimal. And for method, aligning with the US, so you would be able to test to the reference, the chemical method reference would be removed. So, you don't necessarily have to use the Canadian method, which uses, a different acid strength. So instead of that, you could rely on the testing that's been performed for either the F963 EN71 Part 3 or ISO 8124 Part 3, which is 0.07 normal hydrochloric acid, right? So you'd be able to use that instead of the 5% hydrochloric acid. So that, and also referencing and revising all of this and all the other regulations that have been referenced at the bottom. And then finally, for the mercury, revising it to make sure that it's technically feasible instead of 0 ppm. So again, this is more from analytics side because you can't have 0, so you'd always say not detected. And so this is kind of aligning that not detected, similar to like 10 ppm, if you will. So this one was open. The public comment period is closed already. So now it's just a question of Health Canada reviewing those comments and then responding and then publishing the final rule. So once the final rule is published, which will be in Canada Gazette Part 2, the requirements will become effective on the 180th day, so about 6 months after publication. And so with that, I'll switch it over to Stella to walk you through some of the updates from Europe.
Thanks, Pratik. So moving to Europe, the European Chemical Agency announced the addition of 8 new substances of very high concern to candidate list. So you can check the list over here. The producer and the importer of the articles containing the substance included in the candidate list have a 6 months from the date of publication to notify the ECHA of the following conditions apply. The first is substance is present in those articles in quantities over 1 ton per producer or importer per year, and the substance is present in those articles about a concentration of a 0.1 weight by weight. So the supplier of articles which contain these substance in the concentration about 0.1 weight by weight must also provide sufficient information to allow safe use of the article to their consumer or upon request to the consumer within 45 days. So here, of the receipt of the request, the information must contain as a minimal the name of the substance. So moving to the list of the 8 candidate list. So here is the substance list. So I would like to highlight the number 5, the MCCP. So this substance is usually used in flame retardant plastics, rubber or textiles. So if you have those kind of selling those kind of products, you can pay attention for the MCCP. So for the next slide, please. So the European Union issued an update to REACH for demonstrating the conformity of article under entry 25 of Annex 17. The update changed the harmonized method, which should be used for the assessment of products to comply with the nickel release requirement of entry 27, and also the EN 12472 method to the 2020 version of the standard. So here's the list of the standards. So the key changes in the EN standard include the change to requirement for the abraded granule. Clarification in the standard does not apply to the article with an outer coating containing nickel, and those which are inserted into pierced air or other part of a human body. So it's also exists for both EU and the UK. So the European standardization body published 4 new documents for the children's clothing that address security of attached component. 3 of them is a test method and 1 is specification. So it replaced the previous the standards. So this standard, as I mentioned, include 3 test methods and 1 specification. So for part 1 is specification. So this is for the security of attachment of attached component to infant clothing. So it is intended to be supported by test method in part 2, 3, and 4, and provide requirements for button, press, faster, rivet, sequence, and so on. And is applicable for infant clothing up to 35 months and height of 98 centimeter, but is not applied to toys, child care article, footwear, or article sold with clothing. For the part 2, this is a test method for security of attach of buttons. It defines of the test method for the attachment strength of functional and decorative button to the clothing, including glove, hat, scarves, hosiery, ties, and textile belts. So this defines equipment for purpose of gripping of the button, including sew-on button, toggle button, and tag button, and so on. So the test requirement is on the right. So no detached button or part of a button when put the appropriate removal force shall be a small part. So for part 3 is similar to part 2. It's a test method for the security attachment of a metal mechanically applied pressed fastener. So it's also applied to clothing, including gloves, hat, scarves, and so on. And the requirements is same as part 2. So for the part 4, this test method is for the attachment of component except a button and metal mechanically applied press fastener. So this is mainly for include all the other components like labels, badges, sequins, rhinestones, ribbons, eyelet, and any other non-metal pressed fasteners, which is too small to be gripped using the equipment. So this test method is an extremely aggressive wash cycle known as a dual wash to access if the component are securely attached. So the garment will wash 10 degrees above the care label temperature and are also temple dried, even the garment with do not temple dry care label. So all the components shall not be detached, and no detached component or part of the component shall be a small part. So
cool. Thanks, Stella. So staying with Europe, so there were a few updates for the Toy Safety Directive, and so first couple of ones are one for aluminum, the other one for formaldehyde. And so with aluminum, the requirements will become effective on May 20th of this year, and then for the formaldehyde became effective on May 21st of this year. And I won't get into all the details, but you'll have the slides when Amy sends it over. So all the requirements are listed in here. Again, these are the revised requirements. The OJEU, the official journal of the European Union, hasn't published the revised migration requirements yet, right? So therefore, the previous versions still remain the harmonized ones, at least for the time being. And so once they are published in the official journal of the EU, which is kind of like our federal register, which will be hopefully in near future, that will become effective. Next one was the aniline. So this one was a requirement that is applied and added to the Appendix C of the Annex 2 of the Toy Safety Directive. And so for this specific in Appendix C in Annex 2, the requirement only applies to toys that are intended for children under 36 months of age or that are intended to be placed in the mouth. So the aniline requirement is only applicable to those specific subset of toys. You got the requirements of 30 ppm for textile materials, and then for finger paints, the free aniline is limited at 10 ppm, and if it's based on reactive cleavage, it's going to be 30 ppm. Right? So the requirements will become, if they have to be adopted by the member states by end of next year, which would be December 5th of 2022. So looking at the harmonized standards, the EU did publish a harmonized list of standards in May of this year, which updates references for these 3 standards, which is the 7 in Part 7 for finger paints, 12 for nitrous amines, and then for the electrical toy safety. So these are the new standards that provide you presumption of compliance. And then for the older standards that are there are specific dates of withdrawal so that you can continue to use them up until that date, if you will. So you can see like the 2020, the 7 in Part 2, the 2020 version of the standard was published, but that is not published in the harmonized standards. So it is something that I think hopefully the commission will publish in near future and update the references of the standards as well. And the other point that I did want to highlight is for now, with the Brexit, you do have to be mindful of the EU 27 as well as the UK. I think for now the safety requirements are the same, but as the Europe new safety requirements, the toy safety directive is revised. If the reciprocal UK regulation toys regulation is not revised to reflect that, then you would start seeing some divergence. And also from purely paperwork perspective, you also have to be mindful when you're creating the DOCs that you're referencing appropriate standards and also the directives for Europe 27 as well as the toys regulation, right? So just wanted to highlight that for this and also for other regulations as well. So with that, I'll pass it back to Stella to walk us through the enforcement analysis.
Thank you, Pratik. I'll just quickly go over the recall analysis. So for the 2020 for the Health Canada, you can see there's a couple categories for the chemical products, electrical and electronic, and the household items, sports and recreation. Those have a really high percentage of recall. And also I would like to highlight that toys have 9% of the recall for the whole year of 2020. So for the manufacturer selling those products should be mindful. And next slide, please. So for this 2021 half-year analysis, you can see the cannabis has a lot of recalls recently, and mostly for the packaging information is incorrect, and also chemicals. Most of them are for the packaging reason to recall, and household items and toys. Toys still have a really high chance to be recalled if it's not meeting requirements. Next slide. So for the hazard categories, in the last year, 2020, the whole year, there's 16% of the fall hazard, the percentage of the products recalled for the fall hazard, and also have the fire hazard. So fire hazard may include like flammability requirements, or electronic and electronics have the burn or fire hazard, or and also the injury risk. A lot of vehicles have an injury risk and labeling. So these are some most likely reason to be recalled in the last year. For this half year, so you can see there's a lot of like 34, 33 recalls for the burn or fire. So again, this include the flammability requirements for the apparel or electronics or appliance have this burning or fire hazard, and also there's injury and the labelings. Those are like high numbers for the recalls. And for the products type, in the last year, I would like to highlight that essential oil has a really high chance to be recalled. Most of them are because they lack of child-resistant packaging, so that may posing a poisoning hazard for children. And also for furniture, there might have tip over or fall hazard in the off-wheel vehicle, posing like a crash or injury hazard. So next slide for the this half year recalls. There's still the vehicles that have really high chance to recall because of the crash and the injury hazard. Furnitures, and also I would like to highlight that children's apparel has a really high chance to be recalled in this last 6 months. A lot of them recalled because of the flammability or the choking hazard. So for the hazard type, the child-resistant packaging for the essential oil for the last year, and fire hazard, fall hazard for furniture or the other items. So these are the top hazard types for last year. And for this year, this last 6 months for the burn and or fire hazard has a lot of recalls for the like flammability for the sleepwear or electronics and so on. And injury and fall hazard, those are top hazards for the last 6 months. Yeah, that's it for today's webinar.
Thank you, Pratik and Stella, and thank you for everybody for hanging in there. I know we went a couple minutes over. If you submitted a question during the webinar, you will receive an email with a response to that question. And just a quick reminder to everybody, this webinar was recorded, so you'll receive an email with a link to the recording and a PDF of the slides following the webinar. Again, I want to thank Pratik and Stella for their time and expertise today. Please enjoy the rest of your day, everyone. Thank you.